And the other
Whenever TV shows create
oh yeah, yeah. And you do
They want us to, they want us to. It's a bit. No, you can see.
que calor da la Dala la que me Guys.
No, again, That's it, no? Yes, you have to. That's a good speech.
Good afternoon, and sincere apologies for this delay and chaos. But I think it's a testament to the power of Sonali's story and her voice that all of us are here today, and what happened just happened. Anyway, my name is Nelufer Dimel, and I warmly welcome all of you here on behalf of the International Center for Ethnic Studies and Liberation Trust. And it is a real privilege to introduce to you Sonali Dharanyagoda, whose basic training actually is in economics. She's burst out onto the literary scene, but she has degrees in economics from the universities of Cambridge and Oxford, and she teaches economics at the School of Oriental and African Studies at New York. But it is of a deep and devastating personal loss, first on the scene. And as a Gresham trustee, I'm particularly happy to be chairing this session because Sonali has always a mentoring role that the founder of the Gresham Trust played in the development of this book. I think he read early drafts of manuscript. And he said of the book that it is the most powerful and haunting book I have read in years, which brings to life everything the author has lost. And it is that power of her narrative that paved the way for Weir, very simply and starkly put in the title, to be nominated for the National Book Critics Circle Award, nominated for Best Memoir by the Goodreads Choice Award, for the New York Times Book Review to call it Best of the Year, and for it to win the PEN Akerley Award for Best Memoir in 2014. In awarding her the PEN Akerley Award, the chair of the jury noted that, quote, in a strong and varied shortlist, Weir emerged as the winner of this year's prize. Akerley himself with outstanding grace and economy. Teju Cole in the New Yorker similarly commented on its truthfulness, courage, generosity, and the catharsis the book offers each of us. He noted, the pages in the book are difficult to read, but behind them is the generosity of the writer, to her family, to herself, and to her readers. Very few of us will ever experience loss on this scale, but somehow, having written about hers is a kind of consolation for us too. The subject of the talk today by Sonali is art. Sonali mentioned in an interview, writing was her survival. It was my way of being with them. The more I wrote, the more real they became to me. And we're reminded here that art, writing, storytelling is one of the most powerful mediums of imagination. And in that sense, Sonali comes from a long and distinguished line of writers and figures, I guess from Scheherazade, who spun her 1001 Nights of the Arabian tale to survive slaughter, or for political writers like Nigerian Nobel by the Nigerian government for 27 months, during which he wrote a prison memoir that said the will not die. Join me in welcoming Sonali and the title of and Survive.
Thank you, Nilufer, very much for those very generous words and kind words. And thank you to ICS and the Gratian Trust for inviting me. Actually, I was in Sri Lanka for the awarding the Gratian Prize this year, so I wasn't even meaning to speak here. So this is an indulgence, and I really hope it's worth it for all of you who are cramped in here today. So thank you for being here. My talk is called Art and Survival, and about the backstory of how I wrote Wave and why I wrote Wave. I mean, why I wrote is obvious, but really reasons as to about the writing of Wave, how it kept me in this world. Well, it's in December 2000, all of you know, in December 2004, on the 26th of December, I lost my world. And I was in Yala, I was on holiday with my family, with my husband Steve, and my two children, Vikram and Nikhil, or Mandi as we always call him, and my parents. And in an instant, my world disappeared. Until that day, or that moment, I hadn't even heard the word tsunami. And when those waves came charging towards us and churning towards us, I didn't know what was happening. I had no idea, even that it was a threat. It was just slightly odd. And I remembered shouting, I shouted to Steve, my husband, he was in the toilet, and I said, "Come out, Steve, I've got to show you something funny." I meant odd, not hilarious, I think. But, it was just something not terrifying, a little bit different. And when I saw those waves, they became more and more furious, and I always expected them. Of course, they didn't turn back, and we fled. And I've written about, I'm not going to talk here about what exactly happened, but my husband and my children and I, we fled, and we jumped into a Jeep that stopped for us outside the hotel, and the Jeep tried to move through water, which I thought had disappeared, and I had kind of, there was no wave once we fled, but it seeped in from below. And that was basically we were overcome by the deadliest natural disaster in modern times. And only I survived to tell the tale. And the last thing I want to do is tell the tale, obviously, in those first years after. And the only thing I wanted to do was to die. And I really, I had no choice, I thought, but to die. And I was convinced that, I had to kill myself or I wanted to die. And so reason. Were my world, my husband and my parents, and I was determined to die. I was determined to kill myself. And of course, I was just totally stunned and bewildered, and they call it post-traumatic stress, whatever you call it, but it was way beyond that. It was, I couldn't stand up, I couldn't be in a room alone for even a minute. I was so full of terror and pathless, because what was I supposed to do? In that moment when I came out of the wave and I was standing there vomiting blood, and eventually I climbed onto a branch, is how I survived, and I felt trousers off for some reason, because I rather than thinking, I've been wanting to die at my aunt's house here in Ward Place, and I'd lie on the bed and I'd feel the bed was dropping through the floor. I had holes. And of course, I had an army of friends and family and friends from Sri Lanka and from England who came coming in and off, who watched me and did not leave me alone for a moment even. Very annoyingly watched me even if I went to the toilet, someone visiting out there, are you okay? But this went on for months and a year even. And apart from the pain, which is kind of I can't explain, Wave, when I was writing Wave, I thought, there's no way I'll come back to this, but there's no way I can actually capture, and I thought this point was writing this book, because there's no way I can capture the emotions that I was feeling. So in a way, the book is asymptotic, mathematics is an asymptote, it kind of gets close to reality rather than, but I think that's also what all art does, it comes as close to heartbreak and reality as we can make it. And so in those early years, months and a year or so after, I was lying on a bed for most of the time, full of terror. I couldn't bear to look outside. I would draw the curtains, have the curtains closed, be under the covers, even darkness was what I wanted. I could only stand darkness. And my terror in particular, I wasn't scared of the ocean. I would go to the ocean, if someone took me there, I would probably jump in the sea. I was not afraid of the ocean. My terror was of the everyday. I couldn't bear look at a patch of sunshine on the grass because that's where Bikram would have stamped on. I couldn't bear looking at a little child with long eyelashes because that was Maldi's, those eyelashes Maldi had. I couldn't bear, I remember the first time I saw a 100 rupee note and I was terrified because, we would have bought hoppers with that note. I remember thinking the last time I saw one of those, the 100 rupee notes, I had a word. And so I was terrified of the ordinary, of the everyday. And my way of dealing with this was to try and, stay indoors, not peep out, and had to be coaxed and cajoled and say, come on, your blood circulation is going to stop you, don't step out, and bullied into going out. And I would just kind of walk up to the gate and back. I couldn't bear seeing a pair of shoes because that's, my children had shoes. It was very kind of simple. It was the ordinary that was terrifying. It wasn't the rain or monsoon or a storm or an ocean, nothing. I actually went diving about a year later, which I'd never done, and I've been scared of the ocean before. So it was the everyday, it was the detail that terrified me. And what do you do when everything vanishes in an instant? There's no blueprint for this, when everyone you love and your world vanishes in an instant. So, one thing I said is I have to learn this even by heart, even by rote, like a chant, because how do you go from being a mom with 2 children? I was an academic in London, we lived in London, we kind of came back and forth, spent the summers here and Christmas here. We had a really fantastic life, a really rich life, a very happy life. Steve and I, we met when we were 18 at Cambridge, and we've been together since, so kind of grown up together almost. And my parents were very much, integrated into our life. They spent, my dad's court holidays in England, and we spent a lot of time here. So we were, what do you do when everything, vanished in an instant? And I was, apart from the terror and trying to, burn myself with cigarettes and, try and overdose myself with any tablet I could find. And there was a lot of vodka in my aunt's house, Polish vodka, which I kind of, helped myself to in very large quantities, just to numb myself. So one was, I really tried to numb myself. The other was, in my terror, lying on this bed, I said, I have to learn this, they are dead. So I was in this world telling myself that they are dead, they're learning the fact, learning it as a chant almost. So we were meant to go back to London like 3 December. In the free dinner when we got home, they will not eat the pizza, Vikram will not go to school on Monday, Miley will not dance in a circle with his little girls. I had to learn this, and kind of that's what I thought. I thought that I was to bear with this, teach myself this, and that I had to shut off any memory of them, feel of them. It was more kind of one step removed intellectually. I didn't allow myself to feel them. And that was, yeah, cope is by, not by cope, is by not feeling, by trying not to remember. I didn't want to remember, you know, what Bikram looked like when he tried religion, and the deep expressions, and I thought this is the only way on the one hand, I wanted to die, and I felt kind of messy. And this is what grief is, I think. It's there's never one clear, you don't think in any clear way. It's all, you know, it's as chaotic as, you know, any natural disaster or any kind of catastrophe, because my mind had toppled. It was completely in that state. And for a variety of reasons, personal and so on, a year and a half later, in this, and I began to see a therapist. I knew I needed to talk with me, and I had been anyway an objective, external person to talk to, and if I was going to get out of this or kind of live with this in any way, so I began to see my therapist in New York, and I'd go to see him, and I'd always, you know, my theme was that my refrain was, I can't bear this, I want to kill myself, you know, my heart's going to burst. No, it won't. You know, I stumbled, drop dead. But, so I would see him and talk to him all about the fact that, you know, I want to die and I don't want to live. I talked to him, asked me something. See him. So, and he'd always say to me, you should write. And I would say, no, I want to die, not write. And I would resist. But over the years and slowly, I began to write. Because, and also I was in New York City. I, you know, needed, but I needed, you know, and I thought, okay, little bed house, so, you know, when New York gave me the space to be somewhere not entirely unfamiliar, but also not familiar at all. And I was in my little apartment on a bed, you know, with my duvet wrapped around me and with my laptop. And so he would say, write, and I would, you know, I thought, okay, let me try. And I would, just for myself, and I wrote this book, most of it, for a good 5-6 years, I wrote just for myself. It was never going to be a book, and, you know, I had a few friends along the way who read bits or read all of it, and they say, oh, you should make a book. But I was writing to figure something out for myself, because, you know, I thought if this kind of, the worst thing in the world that could happen to me, happened to me, and given that it did, and given with kind of having to live, people calling me every 2 minutes, and, you know, making sure that, you know, and that was, you know, the unsung heroes. You know, I wrote the book, but the unsung heroes of, you know, my survival are this huge army of family and friends who kept me going. And so I began to write, and I wrote, and several things happened in the writing I called the talk, Art and Survival. The first thing I wrote about was the wave itself and what happened to me in the water, because I thought I need to understand if something so mythical, kind of biblical, which is such kind of unimaginable. I still couldn't, you know, when I was writing 3 years later, I'm standing here now, 10 and something years later, I'm still, so I still cannot imagine that I ever was in that wave, in those waves, in that water. It still seems so unreal. What happened to me, because at that time I remember it very clearly as well, and I thought, I better write it down, you know, just to remember for myself. And I remember at the time reading an interview by this Israeli writer, David Grossman, and his son had been killed. His son was in the army, and he had been killed in the final, during the Lebanon War in 2006, 7, in the final days of the, you know, invasion into Lebanon. And he was always a pacifist, and, you know, his son was doing his national service, he was killed, and I'm digressing here. But David Grossman said that, you know, the worst thing has happened to me, but I want to, even if it happened, I want to understand it. I want to feel every aspect of it. I want to hold it in every way possible. And he never spoke publicly about it, but all he said was that, in his work, he was trying to use it, and not use it, but learn it and stay with it. And in that way, I wrote about the wave, my being in the water, and I had to put myself right back there. And I found that I could, almost, and I'm sure there was some, problems with memory, but I never lost consciousness in that water, so I remembered kind of everything. I remember the pain, I remembered thinking, this jeep's on me. That's why, I didn't realize I was drowning. That was just seconds away from drowning, which I know now, because it pushed off. And I also remember weird things, like, I was floating, there's rapids and going, I was on my back. And I remember there was a flock of birds flying above me. My family, my Vikram, especially my dad, identifying birds in amateur ornithology. And I remember looking up and thinking, oh, painted storms. Now here I am in this huge natural disaster, bird watching, and because that's the way your mind goes, you cannot comprehend that this is happening to you, and you resort to being kind of normal and doing, so, but all of this only came back to me when I began to write. And also I thought, because I was writing for myself, I thought I had to be honest. So, and the writing forced me to confront things and to be honest to my. So I remember in the immediate aftermath, I would tell the story to my people by my bedside, my aunts, my cousins, and my friends. And I would say, I was sure they all died. The minute I was in the water, I was convinced that nobody else survived. But when I was writing, and I was really honest, and I put myself back in that water, I knew that the reason I hung on was thinking, what if one of them survived? I better try and live. Which is, I think that's why I didn't die. I mean, I didn't not to. But, I had a different narrative for a long, many, many years. And it was only when I came to writing that I was able to, and her might as well come up with it. And that's the real reason, is that I can't go on, because what if one of them survives? And it's almost, but it was in the point of even admitting it even to myself. So that was one thing that came out of my writing, was to make this unimaginable experience, just for me at least, to make it a little bit more, I could grasp it or grapple with it or remember it in some way. The other thing that the writing did was, of course, it forced me to remember. And kind of, I thought it was really treacherous to go there in my mind. I was terrified. I don't want to remember too much, I don't want to remember Molly stealing a little girl's tutu in his ballet class, because, how can you dance if you're not a girl? He really wanted to be a girl. So how could you? And I remember those, and it was kind of trespassing into those territories I thought was dangerous. I thought I shouldn't remember these things. I'm going to die, it's bad for me, I shouldn't, it's just too much. But the writing kind of showed me what I was able to hold, and of course in the safety of having a brilliant therapist as well. So I was able to go there, remember these thoughts, remember these memories, hold them, and gradually kind of I began to cohere, because I can tell you in those immediate years, even the years immediate, but months and years after, I felt I was in pieces and I could feel myself spinning. I really was in pieces. There was no me. I had completely shattered and I was spinning. And the writing it was completely the opposite of what I thought I should do by not remembering. Actually, it was by gradually remembering and gathering the threads of our life that I began to cohere little by little. And it was a long time. It was 5 years after it happened that I first stepped into our home in London. And really it was by writing about my garden and just remembering it. Remembering what the dewy grass felt like, beneath my feet. Remembering little details, and then I thought, hang on, remembering is so painful, just let me go. And I eventually went back to the house. But so I began to cohere, and also I think it's the nature of this loss, and because it happened in an instant. You had a life and you had a world, and in an instant I did not. And because of that, you don't know what's real and unreal. And I was kind of, I really didn't know, were they real? Did I really have 2 children? Did I really take them to school shouting, don't step on the dog shit? Did I really do all of this? And, was I really a mother? Did my mom, did she walk around wearing these bangles exactly in the house, when Vikram would call them Archie's bells, making a sound all the time? was any of this real? You know, and I couldn't. A lot of me thought this was not, and how am I? And the other thought I had was, if it was real, what am I doing? How can I manage to do that? It seemed that, the two didn't, and the two can't stack up now. Obviously, that loss was so huge, the fact that I can manage to, live a life. I mean, you can't, nothing is commensurate. This kind of world that was really not real. I was not real, they were not real. But by writing, gradually made them real for me. And making them real for me, as I just said, I revived, and I was able to be fulfilled. We had, which was my life, and over many, many years. In general, because I'm talking about art and so I'll just throw in something about writing in general, and it's in the detail. And what worked for me, and I probably want to book, is the detail. And to make them alive, I had to go for the detail. I had to look at the detail, find the detail, and feel it, smell it, all of that, and find the detail. And I think, because I was, I'm also talking to the Gratian kind of audience in a way, and in judging the Gratian criterion, which I noticed my advice to writers there was, the book or some years ago, I remember saying that what's crucial about writing is the detail, and that's where, that's where the authenticity comes from. Now, I was looking for detail for a different reason. I was looking for detail to anchor myself, reality that I lost. But when you write in general, it's the detail, that is the key. And there's great, and it's also, it's not just a detail, it's a detail of ordinary life. It's the everyday, and I think that has a lot to, because that's what at the end of the day makes us human. And that I think that's what is lost. It's hard, that's what breaks one's heart, is the loss of the ordinary. It's not the loss of a great big job or the loss of, it's the loss of the smell of your own laundry in your home. That's what breaks one's heart, and that's what makes human. Great British English novelist, where she says something like, do I have to see? Yeah, it says something like, if we had feeling for ordinary life, we would hear the grass grow and we'd hear the rabbit's heartbeat. It's that kind of detail, it's in that detail that, and so I had to immerse myself in the details in my memory, because everything was gone. All I had was my mind and my heart, and I had to kind of conjure up, our life. Even though it was just there, I had shut down, and that was the way I conjured it up. And and the other thing I had to do, of course, is to be extremely honest in the way I wrote, because I was writing to myself, and precision. So I was trying to be, as precise as I could about feelings. This is guilt or is this shame, and why am I feeling this kind of shame? Because shame was a huge thing for loser. How can you be such a kind of have loss of such an outlying proportions? And so shame was, big in me, and I was trying to understand it, and also be honest with my responses. I know it's all in the book. Immediately after, grief. You don't always have good thoughts when you're in grief. Grief is messy. It's funny. It's not funny, but it's you're annoying, and it's hard on other people. It's hard on you. Your grief doesn't make you a better person. You are who you were, and. Reviewed this book, a novel, but it's autobiographical fiction, called Family Life by Akish, who was born in India. I reviewed it for the New York Times, and he won the Folio Prize recently. New York, and they have two sons. And one of this 14-year-old on holidays, and the kid jumps into this pool, hits his head, and he's brain dead, brain damage for the rest of his life. The book's written from the voice of the brother who is watching his parents' lives change drastically and focus only on this sick boy. They have him in the middle of their living room. They're crying. They can't see the little boy who's now you know, the brothers, 10, 9, 10, growing up, he goes. And 1 year later, the boy, that's a great line, but 1 year later, the family is really sad and they're marking 1 year after the accident, and the dad says, "You're sad? I want to kill myself every day." And but this is how people behave in grief, and I thought that's a brilliant line. It's so honest, and that it is autobiographical fiction, so you couldn't make that up because you don't think about the other person, even though the other person is an 8-year-old in that case or a 9-year-old. And I think that is maybe the value, I hope, of writing honestly about grief and honestly about loss, is that, it shows it in all its dimensions. And so one of the main, I know, make them. I recently also gave a talk in New York at the Rubin Museum, and the talk was, there was a series of talks, and I did one at Q&A, and it was called The Attachment Trap, was theme of the series, and it was about, attachment is a problem in a Buddhist sense, and it's about, but my, path up to now has been not to detach, it has been attached, because in an instant when everything was severed, I told myself, well, I have to kind of drop it, or I would drop them. But the way I kind of managed to revive myself, at least to this extent, is by reattaching. And I had this, make them dead, but it's really by making them undead that I wrote Wave to make them undead and to bring them back to life. And not to be so rigid about, dead and alive, or alive and not alive. And I remembered, some years ago, but I always thought about this. About a month before the tsunami happened, Mandy, my youngest, he was 5, and he was first and said, "Oh God, this teacher stopped me for a long time. Kept me for ages in the school gate because said we have a real problem with Nikhil in the science class. Why? Because they have to learn alive, not alive, and he wouldn't accept the categories. And she obviously has 30 kids in the class, has to tick off the fact that all 30 know what's alive and not alive. And Mandy goes, no. So she goes, cars equals alive. And she says, no, isn't it a sound? Alive. And so everyone else except Mandy goes, no. She goes, not alive, he goes, alive. And so my poor husband would move on 1-year-old and trying to, and so he came home and I thought, okay, let me try and deal with this. And then Mama, can you do alive, not alive? He looked at me and said, teachers, not alive. But I always keep distinctions in a way. Between, does it matter? I mean, it does, not in a Pollyanna kind of way, of course. At the end of the day, it comes down to love. In memory and by memory, everything. But love doesn't die. It's love that comes, that certainly kept me in this space, and it is, that really is the key, because that doesn't die, and in the end of the day, that's where humanness is. In addition to a Nobel lecture on poetry given by Seamus Heaney, when he won the Nobel for crediting poetry. And he talks, and he says something like, allow the internal, sweetness and trust inside us, and it's that, it is the tension between the two in a way that creates art, I think. Or in his case, creative poetry. He used uh, in that way. Do I have much more time? Oh. Maybe I should talk a little bit more about the making of art in, I wrote this in order to understand this for myself. And also comes a point when writing, if you're writing a book, at least in my case, I became, and I became addicted to how to write. Then it kind of becomes a area of trying to craft something, trying to think of the best word. You're trying to make out of it, and that mediates the pain of writing memoirs such as mine. The writing was my lifeline because there's something intellectually as well for me to think about, to wake up and think and learn. And how did I learn to be a writer when I wrote this book? And I only learned by reading. I would read and try and kind of see what works, see what doesn't work, and write in that way. There's artness of survive. And I was in Boston recently. I spoke and gave a similar talk. I'm so in shock. And today I was in my old neighborhood in Rigasaya, and I remember that when I was a child, and even into my teens or early married years, maybe this kind of, street person who walked around the streets, and she looked bewildered always. Her hair was matted out, and she was kind of, she walked around, and people in the and all of that, they would say, Miss Gandhi, and call her. And I remembered her, and I told Marianne about this story, and now even in my mind, I thought, I'm still bewildered. It is like her. My mind is like this woman still wandering the streets, kind of wondering, what happened. But that, that's still true. But, for me personally, the way to deal with it has not been to try and move on, or, you move on every day by waking up and so on. But it's not been to not talk about it, not feed it. And actually, it's about, I've done the opposite. I've tried to feed it as best I could, and that certainly has kept me here, is by remembering and feeding. And so if there's one thing, I would say to anyone, who suffers loss, or that we should feel both of it, we should feel it all. Because if you can't feel the loss, you can't feel love, and if you can't feel love, you can't feel joy. And that is, for me, what worked is really, and work, again, what worked kind of suggests, it's all done and sorted. It's not. However, what has sustained me has been really the opposite of what conventional wisdom would say. Move away, don't go back, don't let things haunt you, don't, and it's been the opposite. It is going back, reclaiming every part of it. And as much as I could, there's still things I haven't done. I haven't gone back to where I used to teach as SOAS, which I will be doing soon, but physically at least. It's the opposite, and just because you feel pain, that you can't hold the other, that you can't hold the life, and that you can't hold joy and all that. I think, so to conclude, Swedish Nobel laureate who died recently, Thomas Tranströmer, I can never say his name. And he was blind, so he had a stroke, I think, in the last 20 years of his life. And his great poem called Memories Look at Me, and Memories Look at Me. And it ends by something like how the memories follow him. He wakes up, and I won't quote again, but he wakes up and it's June morning, and it's too early to wake, but it's too late to go to bed again. So he walks into the greenery is dense with memories, and the memories follow him. And he says something like, they're so close, I can almost hear them breathe. The song is deafening. So the bird song is the present, and I feel the memories is the past. And in a way, we're all able, to juggle as much as possible, to hold, even juggle is the wrong word, to hold and embrace both realities. And, that's what Right Wake enabled me to do. But I take this.
For a very powerful talk about learning to live after that kind of a loss, and learning to live through your writing, and paying attention to the detail. You said whoever to cohere through the detail, and that allowed you also to blur the categories, taken from Gandhi's paradigm, right? So you very deliberately then begin to blur the categories of absence and presence, of death and life, and of writing, of the actual craft of writing. That paid attention to technique was yet another way that permitted you to survive. It's been a very rich talk, and I'm sure we have a lot of questions, so the floor is open to any of you who want to ask some other questions. Yes.
How old? Rick was nearly 8. He was just 2 months short of 8 when he was 5 and a half.
Any other questions? Comments?
We want to ask you one big question, and that is question of destiny. Your father was my classmate at St. Thomas, and he invited me to come on a trip to Yala 3 months before he left.
Oh, really?
And he tried to contact me. But I would want to do some theatre workshop in Nigambo. And I found that when I heard that he had gone this way, I asked myself a big question, and that is, why? And whether there is something called destiny in life. And I couldn't find any answer. And then I read a book, and strangely enough, it satisfied me, gave me an answer, but I still feel that the big question of destiny, because he tried to contact me, I know, to come on this trip. He asked me 2 questions. What are you interested in? We met after 25 years at a party, and he said, hey, what are you interested in? It's drama, but then what about anything else? I said, wildlife. I'm going. You must join me on my next trip. So to me, it's destiny that I didn't go, in a sense. So that is why I asked myself, why did he go and why did the others go too? There's a book called The Bridge of the San Luis Rey, where people cross the bridge and break this breaks and falls, and only one journalist in America tries to find out why. Was it because of anything bad they were trying to do, or good? And he found that 2 were on track and 2 on a mission that was good. So you question answer.
Yeah, take a round. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Yes.
Out of curiosity, what is the most frequent question or questions that you get asked when people hear your story? Like, what kind of reactions do they give frequently?
Okay, I'll keep that one. Yeah.
Any others? There's a question back there.
So it's a question of 2 parts. It's a 2-part question. One is related to empathy and the other to religion. So one is obviously after a loss so huge as your own, how do you relate and empathize with everyday loss of grief? So whether it's someone losing a job or losing a relationship, or divorce, have you found that this huge devastation in your life has made you a more empathetic or less empathetic individual? And do you feel that you're able to make people more resilient through that learning? And are you able to sympathise on the day-to-day losses on a small level after having something so tragic happen in your life? And the second is, which religion, if any, do you follow? Whether it's, obviously you mentioned your husband is essentially a Christian, and I'm assuming that you potentially have Buddhist beliefs, or do you feel that this has shaken your religious beliefs as a whole?
Empathy, I think, probably just the same as I was, no different. I don't think it makes you, I was not an unempathic person before, I hope. So I don't think, especially, I understand things now, which I probably didn't before, but I've always had, a lot of friends, and I've been involved in the trials and tribulations of everyday life, which I actually want to be. I don't want to be tragedies all the time. I'd much rather talk about the loss of a job or, someone's shirt in the wrong color or something, rather than, lots of death and tragedy. And, I'm also not the kind of person who feels the need to, surround myself with others who suffer devastating loss. If my friends have lost, I'm there for them, but I don't need to seek out, because, so that's just me, then some things work for others, some people, so that's the empathy. Religion, I'm broadly spiritual, but I don't think, Destiny, I just think it's random. You know, I don't, that's the economist in me.
Go for another round of questions.
Frequently asked questions. I honestly don't speak in public much, so I've done about 2 or 3 big ones in New York, around America, and one of the frequently asked ones is, how are you now? And I think that's probably, or that's what, even if they don't ask, that's what everyone's thinking, I think. And
why did you turn to writing? Was there ever any other form of art that recommended itself to you?
I guess I can't dance, or you know, I can't no, you know, when I was about 10, and we used to go carol singing in the ladies' college. My friend Kay, who's here, said to me, "Stand in the back and say the words." So I can't sing, also crazy, you know. And if you're writing was, I don't know, I can't do anything, you know. I did start, actually, the first thing I did was, my memory is down here. The first thing I did was to take photographs. One of the first things I did, I got a camera and would go around Sri Lanka, go to Yada, in fact, even take photographs of, you know, your remains around the Yada Safari Hotel, or take, you know, and so I took a lot of photographs of wildlife, because that was maybe my way of looking. When I was still trying to not remember, but I also wanted to look, I was taking photographs, and I got, you know, quite addicted to that for about 1.5 years, and for some more time, and then I began to write and drop that. No. I believe in rebirth, but I don't believe in predestined to think that I'm with that. There's one thing I've had to deal with is this notion, and I still deal with it. Is, you know, I had a very very lovely childhood in Colombo, and growing up in the 70s and 80s when I did a Q&A in New York with a kind of psychoanalytic. One of the ones I did was with this kind of, you know, American psychoanalytic. They were Freudian. They're looking at your childhood and see, you know, is there anything in your childhood? I think is what he was trying to look at. So he said, about your childhood. And I said, well, we didn't have television. You know, we only got television when I was 14, and we had Sesame Street and color bars. And at 14, I watched the color bars before watching Sesame Street. And, you know, at the same time running off with boys and doing all kinds of things in cars. So, however, you're still watching Sesame Street, and, you know, being a preteen at the age of 14, but you know, why did I say that? Yeah, so one problem I've had is this notion of, you know, I've been kind of marked, even that innocent experience of being a child, and, you know, I had this coming, and I must have, you know, that it marked me, and it kind of discolors my memory of that in some way, and I'm really trying to deal, you know, think about that, that's really not correct. But emotionally, I'm trying, if I'm writing again now, I'm trying to write. It's to do with that, trying to say, actually, this was very normal, there was nothing in that kind of, ooh, you know, that would show you that something terrible is going to happen. And so, but, you know, we may be intellectually able to kind of dismiss things, but emotionally dismissing things is very different, and that's something I have to deal with. Oh, yes, please go.
I'm wondering, how do we support somebody who has this fear of this? How can we support someone who has experienced a big loss? I mean, I'm asking this from the point of view of the person who like you, and so as if we are family or friends, how necessarily trying to put.
That's a very good question. I think for me, what's important, which I also try to do, is you need to validate the person's feelings. You can't say, you're okay, no? People would say to me, I say, no, actually, I'm very awful. Because, they want, not so often people want you to say, you're okay. So, it is to allow the person to feel their way through. It might take them 20, 30 years, but what they feel is what they feel. You know, that can't be fast forwarded or, you know, nothing to be. But however, in expressing the fact that they're not okay, they are becoming okay, I feel. You know, that connection, the fact that somebody is recognizing the fact that you're really still, you know, 6 months and 7, you know, 6 years and 7 months later, still feeling terrible, that somebody's listening, and, you know, that makes you feel okay. A little bit okayer than you did an hour ago. And I think that's one, and there is no blueprint, and that's the other thing. But, you know, huge loss for any individual loss. There is no blueprint, and people have to find their own ways, and, you know, and the other thing is don't be prescriptive, and that's what, you know, don't, and, you know, one thing that, you know, I had to be very stubborn, and I think, you know, we all have to be stubborn in the way we deal with this and do what works for us, because nobody else knows really.
Any other questions?
Now you may share a recollection of Sonali with you. After this enormous tragedy, a few months later, and in the way of every little baby, you know, moving about, so that Sonali takes the baby, the responsibility for his safety, and the way she handled that, the love and tenderness she showed. I looked at her and said, "You're one huge person."
Thank you.
One thing I want to show you. Secondly, response wasn't only to ensure participate at the memorials in Yala, and also the local friends support. And she moved with the people as a person, not as somebody, you know, some mother about school with some mother. And there's one little boy in the husband's family. He's not so in the way of some of the mom like love and this experience. She has never been afraid. Oh, it hadn't ever occurred to her. She will wait. What life? That's what.
I think certainly. I think it is the generosity of spirit that comes across in the book, and so many reviewers have commented on the generosity with which and the honesty, the honesty with which she shares her story is also comes. It can only come from that kind of deep generosity. So Nandi, I want to ask you whether many writers who've won tremendous accolades for their writing say that this is a poison chalice. You are one of Sri Lanka's writers, perhaps circumstances, also by being in New York and being in a way within court in the right place at the right time. Is phenomenally successful in getting the kind of attention that you have by top writers like Joan Didion and so on and so forth, and also publishers. How do you find that shapes, or how do you find that? I mean, is this a huge expectation? Is this a burden in some way?
Well, I was hugely lucky, you know, it was just serendipity that about 5 years later, I was in New York, and through Radhika here, I met Michael Mandashi, and we had dinner, and we got on very well, and, you know, I was writing quietly at that time, so, you know, I didn't even tell him I was writing, but he knew my story, we didn't talk about it at all. But I've been writing for another kind of about 7 years after, and I've written a lot of, I think it's been manuscript, and people like Radhika, my therapist, kept saying, you should show it to Michael, show it to him, and I really didn't want to. This is Michael and that, this is me who's never written a word. And but eventually I wrote to him and said, Michael, remember me, kind of thing, and do you mind reading something? And then he said, send me 30 pages, and I did. And he was in the middle of Cat's Table. So a long time, he took it and I said, oh, I really didn't want him to read it, so I sent it and I thought I would keep them. But, to cut a long story short, so he got back to me and said, do you have any more? And I gave him everything to read, and then, he responded. So put me on to his publisher who did it on Knopf and so on. And there's no expectation, actually. They've been so generous in that way to me. They just let me be. But Ellen Seligman is Michael Dudge's editor, my editors in New York are his editors. So we had a lovely team, but we didn't, and I gave them a book, and we didn't change words, but we never really kind of took anything out, paragraphs. So it was very gentle editing and light editing, and even if I said, let's take something else, they said, go to there. So I had really, worked on it a lot, so there's no expectation, but in terms of, another kind of, it's not a literary point, but I'm so aware that the majority of people who suffer loss in natural disasters are, do not have the educational, background that I have. And I teach a course on disasters and economic development at Columbia, and it's all about disasters and inequality, and what inequality means in the way that we cope with natural disasters. Because it's the poor who suffer, mortality-wise, loss of income, loss of resources, which they never recover from. And that's what I teach in my intellectual academic life, one of the things I teach in my economic life. But in terms of writing, so yeah, I was very fortunate where I was placed, and then just luck for the individuals who came into my life at the right time, who also never pushed me to, I got this book right, I never did one television appearance anywhere in the world, where people normally for some story like this put you on chat shows, and they all said to me, I said I wouldn't, they said to me, don't do anything. I didn't do a single bookstore event, I didn't do anything. I did 2-3 interviews in each country, that is Canada, America, and England. And lately I've been doing a few public events at kind of safe places, museums, and at the Clinton School I did one. But I'm very careful as to, so I've been protected. So I've kind of had, guardians.
Right, so thank you very much. This has been a wonderful, for many, for reasons we can understand. Sonali was out of the limelight, but now she's emerged. She feels she can emerge slowly but surely. And we're very grateful to you, Sonali, for sharing your life and your thoughts and your writing with us. Thank you.
I'll go.
What is your